There are many social workers that don't do therapy, right? So it's good to separate the two. They're a bit different. It's so sad, and it's on the regular that people are unable to get the care that they need when they do. Okay, what about the companies that have made this addictive software? What role do they have to play, right? Where's the laws that regulate them? Now I'm realizing I think a lot more people than I've ever realized deal with burnout. A lot of people are turning to AI, ChatGPT, as their therapist. The goal of therapy is that you don't need a therapist. Interestingly enough, in these studies is that the most telling predictor of a person's success and how well they can heal from trauma, heal from whatever they're working in a therapy is...
Hi, and welcome to the Key Causes podcast. When people think about social work, they often picture paperwork and child services. And the truth is that they're also therapists, advocates, and healers. Today, I'm joined by my special guest, Kim Schuster, and we will uncover what the work really looks like. But before we get into the heavy stuff, Kim, I want to start with something light. If someone was meeting you for the first time today, how would you introduce yourself?
My full name, Kimberly Schuster, but please call me Kim. My pronouns are she, they, and I am Kim Schuster, ACSW, which stands for Associate Clinical Social Worker. Hopefully soon to be Kim Schuster, LCSW, when I take my test at the end of the year. So that'll be something that's coming up. I would say that, and I would say I'm a person with a background in struggling with mental health, and wanting to explore my journey and studying psychology undergrad, and then ultimately going to my master's in social work and working with different groups, children, adults, all those things to kind of get to where I am today. And that's a bit about me.
Oh, that's amazing. So
cool.
How long have you been in the social work industry combined with all of your education?
2019 to now, 6 years. 6 years off and on. Yeah.
So you've been in the industry for a little while, but if you were not a social worker, what do you think you'd be doing today?
Ooh, what a good question. I think I would be doing sustainable architecture. I took a course in my undergrad. That was one of the last courses I took before I left UC Davis. And I remember leaving that course and I was like, wow, if I took this course maybe my freshman year, I would have shifted my entire focus. I love sustainable architecture. It's such a unique kind of area. It builds on this love from Sims, this world building, Sims, the game. And also to the idea that we can change our communities and make it more healthy for the community, more just nice, better for the environment. It's super neat. So, oh gosh. So I would love if you ever interviewed somebody with sustainable architecture, I would be watching that all day and all night.
I'm gonna have to go find someone specifically in that field. If you're in Sacramento and you're in sustainable architecture, please reach out to us. Let's get you connected in on the episode. So, when people think about social work, they specialize in so many different places, in schools, hospitals, community programs, and everything you can imaginably think of. So what do you specifically specialize in, and what would a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, so it's a mix. So a lot of my experience, I would say, is in what's called integrated behavioral health. So what that is that, for example, you go see your doctor. Maybe you're feeling a little bit sad, a little anxious. The doctor does a quick screening. They're like, how sad and depressed are you? And based on that, if you score really high, they're like, whoa, we need to call in somebody, or you express that you want to do therapy, you want some healing, they'll call a person, and that's where I come in usually. I'm that kind of in-between person that's like, hey, I work with the doctor, heard you're having a tough time, let's talk about it. Here are your options. We have this therapy, we have this, you can go to here, there, people with all kinds of different things. So maybe they have mental illness and substance use, abuse problems too. Right? Then I would refer them to different programs that offer those things for them. So it's kind of like this in-between person that refers, but also does treatment myself. So I also do short-term and long-term therapy. This is in my previous role, but the one I've held the longest, especially I'm trained, I'm certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as TFCBT. That is kind of my wheelhouse there. I got trained by UC Davis, and it's an incredible program. But so mostly children and teens, that's what it's supposed to work with, but it works really well with adults too. So I work with adults as well, people of all ages. So my youngest clients are often ages 12 to ages 60 and 70 and above. It's a huge range. And so there's that, as well as resources, especially. So not only am I saying here, go to these counties, but, oh, you need food. Here's a food shelter. Here are, you're having some difficulty with utilities. Here, SMUD does this utilities program. Check it out. If I have the time, I might even fill it out with them, or I might even do the phone calls with them. Like, hey, let's call it together. Maybe you're really depressed. You have no energy to do any of these things. Let's do it together, So it's a variety of things, which I love about my job. I love that I can do these different things. So yes, in a therapy, clinical capacity, and also a resource capacity too. But I have to be mindful at which job I'm at. Certain things stand out more. So in my most recent job, I was a case manager at a medical group. They provide to people with Medicaid, Medi-Cal. And in that position, I had to be mindful that I was not providing therapy because my role was not a therapist. Even though I have all the training, I had to be mindful that they have to go to their own therapist. It can't be me. So it really depends on which job I'm in. Certain skills will rise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned whenever they're at the doctor's, is that how you get the referral, or can it go to you directly? Or does it have to be through the doctor that has to refer them to you?
Yes, good question. Usually through the doctor, but there are times that people might show up to our department being like, I really need help. And it's like, all right, we're going to get you onto our caseload ASAP, Or sometimes they're seeing a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist sends a referral. So it kind of depends. But this, again, is the model that we had at our federally qualified health center in FQHC. These are generally the clinics. If you're on Medicaid, often these people are going to community clinics, FQHCs, which is where I had that work at.
So stepping back a little bit and going back to the social work, the education part of it.
Yes.
What does the education path look like for someone that is getting into social work? You mentioned like there's the therapy part, there's also the case management, the programs and stuff. So
right.
What are the general degrees or certs that you kind of have to go through to get into the field?
So the neat thing is that even though there is a bachelor's in social work, you don't need it, which is great. So a lot of people, like your previous speaker, Johnny Cuestas, myself included, we had different backgrounds. Mine was in psychology. I think his might have been in psychology as well. Could be wrong. But, having these different backgrounds and then ultimately going to a master's program, and it's going to be for social work. And that's kind of where we get the training, I would say. And that's like usually a 2-year program. If you did a bachelor's in social work, that's actually really handy because it speeds up your master's. So instead of doing a 2-year program, it's 1 year. But it's a really fast program. It's, from what I've heard from people who've been in it, it's brutal, but they get it done really quickly. So pros and cons. You can get your bachelor's in social work or get your bachelor's in anything else and then have those 2 years with something else. I will say though, from my standpoint, multiple professors and people have told me that having my background in psychology has been very beneficial. Because a lot of our work when we're in clinical social work is diagnoses. And with that background of psychology, I know a lot of diagnoses. That's a lot of my undergrad work was in that, as well as in research as well with UC Davis. So that really lends itself to being very helpful for a master's in social work, but it's not needed.
Yeah, I can see how the diagnosis part definitely plays a role because there's so many different acronyms behind people's titles. And then there's, you said psychologist, there's a therapist, there's a social worker. And so what is the difference between pretty much a social worker and a therapist, or are they the same thing?
Right? Such a good question. There are many social workers that don't do therapy, right? So it's good to separate the two. They're a bit different. Social workers are people who've done their master's program in social work, and then they've gotten their approval from our licensing board to say, yay, you can go practice out there. And they'll do social work in whatever kind of capacity. So it could be case management, and then they never have to get their clinical work. You have to, in order to get your clinical work to become that therapist, you have to do those licensing hours, which you discussed with Johnny. It's those 3,000, as of recently, 3,000 hours of, training that you have to go through under a person that is licensed. So next level up. And once you get the okay, signatures on everything, then you can go the next step to get your license. And that's when you are by yourself practicing as a therapist. You can do that. You don't have to, but it's an option. And so LCSW, so maybe I'll explain the acronyms.
Sure, yeah.
ACSW, which is what I am, is an associate clinical social worker. And we get that first, and then next is the licensed clinical social worker, LCSW. These are the therapists that you're going to see in the community that have their own practices, their own buildings, or whatever. They're the ones that are kind of calling the shots, essentially. They're in supervisory positions, that sort of thing. They have a clinical background, but maybe not necessarily are in a clinical position. They can be in hospice, not necessarily providing therapy, but they're licensed. They have that experience to provide. So social work, therapy, a bit different, especially since our programs, I can't speak to all programs.
Sure.
I went to Sacramento State. In that program, they did not specifically train us in therapy. I'm not sure if that's the case for other programs, but that did make things a little bit harder when I got out to the fields, because other master's programs, if you're doing any other master's, like in marriage and family therapy, MFT, or clinical counseling, they actually will train you in school. Us, no training. There's none. So we're really going out there kind of, we got to figure this out on the job in our internships. We're figuring it out as we go. So it does make it a little harder as a social worker to become a therapist, to have all that training. You have to kind of go out of your way to get it.
So it sounds like social work is kind of like that first step. You know the programs, you find the resources, you know how to direct people to the right resources.
Right.
But you may not always be that therapist, because that's going to be that next level where you have to do the extra licensing and the certification. Then you could also be that therapist because you put in the hours and the training for that specific niche, whatever that may be.
Exactly. And the problem is that it's a lot of money. It's not cheap to get the licensing and the courses that we have to get a license. It's not cheap. So it's a lot of red tape. So actually, I know a lot of fabulous social workers that have never once even decided to get their license. They're like, I've been in the field for 10 years. They're like, nah, no need to, because they're just comfortable. Area they do for social work, it's good. They don't need to do therapy, and props to them. But I find that there's a lot more doors that open once you get your license, a lot more positions that are open. So that does help.
Yeah, I feel like just being a social worker is a compass for people. So that in itself is really rewarding. And then figuring out where you want to go, what doors you want to open, that's where the licensing comes into place.
That's why I tell people time and time again, and I've heard this from multiple people who got their master's in marriage and family therapy. They're like, I wish I was a social worker, because then I could do 20 other areas. But if you're marriage and family therapy, you're kind of pigeonholed into only doing therapy. Like, yes, you can do different types of therapy, do different audiences, children, adults. But with social work, I love it because it's so broad and encompassing, and it does all these things, and you can do all these levels. It's great. It's something that I really like about the fields.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And then for social work and case management, I don't think people really understand what case management means. So can you break down, like, what are the levels of case management? What is that? And what do you get with each level as it kind of goes up or down, or how does it all work?
Yeah, exactly. What a good question. So with case management, so it's a really cool benefit. A lot of health insurances actually will offer case management. So if, for example, any of your listeners are on Anthem Blue Cross Medi-Cal, Health Net Medi-Cal, Kaiser Medi-Cal, or Molina Medi-Cal, these are the main ones in Sacramento County, they will have access to case management, especially depending on what diagnoses, what's going on, but more often not, people can qualify. And as you mentioned, different levels. The first level is called, I think, CCM. So it's like comprehensive. This kind of level of case management is more so a nurse is checking in, an RN. Usually it's telehealth. So they're calling and being like, hey, how are you doing? Did you get to those appointments? I know that you were confused about this referral. I can do some phone calls for you in the background, but very much they're a little more hands off. They're kind of like doing the phone calls. I'll check in with you maybe every week, maybe every month. So helpful if you need a little bit of a push, a little bit of reminder, some accountability to get to your appointments. Remember, oh yeah, I was going to see that therapist. Oh yeah, I wanted to see my cardiologist, that's an option. But for people who need extra support, there's the next level up. So that's enhanced care management. And that is the very, very involved case management that I was doing. Sometimes it's called intensive case management. I also did that as well. But essentially you're going with that person to these places. So they're like, oh, I don't have an ID for driving, or, oh, I don't have my public benefits, got to go to the DHA. So we'll go together, or we'll go to the appointments together. And if they're struggling to ask the doctor questions or make sense of their diagnosis, we're there. We're like, hey, what about this? What about that? They're also doing these treatments. How does these interact? And they also follow up on the referrals. So it's very involved.
Wow.
So it's a very different, and it's awesome because it's all free. It's all free through Medi-Cal. So sign up for it, guys. It's great. It's such a great and underutilized resource in the county and throughout the state. So awesome. ECM's great. It's not forever. So ultimately you will meet your goals and you'll graduate out of the programs. And that's true for both ECM and the lower level ones as well. But some of them have time limits. Kind of depends. Depends on the program. Not all ECM, not all case management programs are the same. Some of them are set at 1 year. Some of them are as long as you need it. It really varies on how long you can be in the program for. Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like there's anything from something that's pretty basic as making a phone call, looking up a resource, to literally driving them, helping them fill out forms.
Yeah.
So then how do you do the actual signing, or not signing, but how do they give you consent? Because it's like medical information sometimes. So what does that process look like? Do they have to sign waivers, forms, and these other things?
Yes. What a good point. So generally, it depends on where you get this program. If you're getting this program through Medicaid, so through your health insurance, things are pretty well connected. So you actually don't need to sign any waivers, which is really nice, because there's times where maybe I'll go to an appointment with a patient for the cardiologist or for whoever, their clinic, their primary care doctor. And we don't need to exchange all these, releases of information, have me on their documentation. They don't need it, because I'm working with their health insurance and we're contracted with them. So that is a huge thing there, which makes things a lot easier. But if you are in a case management program that is outside of that, some people will do their own kind of case management, maybe from home, kind of thing, or like their own kind of business. Then yes, they're not contracted with the insurance. They probably will have to get some of those forms signed, which make it a little more tedious, but is also an option for people if they need it.
So people that are on Medicaid and Medi-Cal, they could, I guess, through their doctor, still get those services, and those Medicaid, Medi-Cal services will cover the fees and everything else that that's associated with it. So if someone is seeking help and doesn't know that they have these options available, they should ask their doctor?
Yes, their doctor or their health insurance. Their health insurance can probably also direct them. For example, I suggest all your listeners to be able to call their health insurance if they're needing that extra support. And they could be like, hey, do you guys offer any kind of case management of any kind? And they might say, oh yes, we have ECM, we have CCM. Here we have these programs we can link you up to. That's awesome. So I'd say definitely start with your health insurance, see if they can pay for it before you start to do the research on your own.
Yeah, that makes sense. For someone that might not know that they qualify for Medi-Cal or might be uninsured right now, and they want to know where they can go to find out more information about Medi-Cal or Medicaid, where do they go to find that program and find out more to see if they can sign up?
Yeah, there are several different ways to go about this. So Department of Human Assistance, where your wife works, that's one option. They'll tell you about the programs there. But a lot of community health clinics actually will have their own set of teams that will help guide them. So they're like, oh, you're undocumented, maybe you can't pay. They talk about, hey, let's do sliding scale, or we can get you onto a health insurance, that's another option. So there's advocates in many health clinics that will be able to help people get onto these programs.
When people get onto the programs, do they ever experience any like common issues, especially in the Sacramento area? And how do you help navigate those challenges?
You would think that having double coverage would be a benefit, great, I have someone there to catch me in case this one falls through. It actually makes billing sometimes more difficult, which is the worst part. So sometimes they fight with each other, like, who's going to pay for this bill? They're like, I don't want to pay. I don't want to pay. So they go back and forth. So sometimes having both is not always better between Medicaid and Medicare. Other roadblocks, I'd say, for when you're dealing with that is with Medicaid. This is true for all of Medicaid, but sometimes it's difficult to see providers, especially in a timely way. So sometimes you might have a clinic and maybe your next time you see your doctor or a specialist is in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It's so sad, and it's on the regular that people are unable to get the care that they need when they do. So people are waiting insanely long times for their doctors, their specialists, their therapists, waiting for referrals to go through. It was a full-time job for me to call people referrals. Like, even if the doctor writes a referral, what if they missed a word? Now the referral gets bounced back and it goes back and forth, and you have to call the doctor, then call the specialist, and call the doctor, call the specialist. It is a full-time job. So sometimes people really have the misconception that Medi-Cal, because it's free, they have it easy. They don't. People with Medi-Cal, Medicaid, it's not easy. It is a fight every step of the way. That is why it's my full-time job to manage these very complex and honestly sometimes very frustrating systems. So I would say it really depends on the person, the situation, but the wait times really stand out in my mind. And billing is big. And if you aren't on time with refilling your documentation to say, hey, I still need Medi-Cal, Medicaid, if it drops, everything drops. All your appointments, all your specialists, everything is gone. You have to rebuild all that back up. It is very hard. It's not easy. So many different roadblocks, especially with my folks that don't speak English. It's even more so. Yes, Insurance's clinics might offer an interpreter, but oftentimes it's a whole lot of effort. And these interpreters don't maybe necessarily have a medical or the terminology. And so they go back and forth and maybe not best practices. That makes it a lot harder for people who don't speak English to navigate these already very complex systems. So it's really tough. It's not an easy thing.
Dang, yeah, that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
I could see the billing and the timelines between your next appointments being a challenge.
Yes.
What about people that, let's say they look at the research, whatever, and they don't get signed up, they get rejected off Medi-Cal and Medicaid? You mentioned advocacy groups. So where can people go? Is there a website to find the advocacy group? Is there like Facebook groups we can join? Is there like the post on the Nextdoor app?
Right, exactly. Right. I wish there was all those options. No, the advocacy groups I'm referring to are usually within the clinic. So the clinic will have that group there. And these are people that will be like, hey, let's talk about if you want to see your doctor, let's do a sliding scale. You can pay as little as $5 for your appointment or $10, So they'll work with you. They're at the clinics, at the community clinics.
Gotcha.
So you would go to your local community clinic. You could probably find this by typing in Federally Qualified Health Center, so FQHC, and look at FQHCs near me or community clinics near me. And when you go to those clinics, there likely will be an advocate or group of people that can help you figure out and navigate that to get into it. Or if you can't get into Medi-Cal, as you said, then they can help steer them to other ways to be able to see their providers, therapists at a very low cost.
No, that's great. And it's great that they're right there at the clinics as well. So they can really go straight to the resource and help them find what options they actually do have.
Yes.
So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about a little bit more on the therapy side.
Yeah.
With kids, is there a common issue or pattern that you're seeing when they're coming in? Is there like repeat problems that they're coming to you with? Not to say anybody in specific, more on the general term. Is it more like social anxiety, inability to communicate, relationship building? Is there a common theme or a trend that you're running into?
Currently, my most recent demographic, it's of all ages. But at the time that I first started working with and only with kids was during the pandemic. And that was a time where the kids were on the computers, all day, and even we were doing therapy over computers, which, as you can imagine, with a 6-year-old, try to get them sit down on a computer and interact with someone they've never met can be challenging. It's a lot of running around. And so I've noticed that during that time period, and even actually in the years following COVID, repercussions from that period of time where kids were out of school, the difficulty with focusing, the struggles with social anxiety. Yeah, because maybe they lost a lot of friend groups or struggling to reconnect once they got back into school. That's also very common. But more often than not, actually, I would speak to general symptoms of trauma, because trauma is very broad overview, but there's a lot of alignment between trauma and ADHD, right? Poor focus for a lot of reasons. I would love to get into like the neurobiology and the chemistry about it, but I can't. That would take too much time. But there is a lot of alignment. So there's a lot of like kids that more so and more so parents are requesting, hey, can we get ADHD assessments for my kid? Over, and just it floods in. We were having so many ADHD assessments. I did many of them myself, but it's very difficult because so much of it is sussing out, is this trauma? Is this ADHD? Is it both? Right? Because these can be impacting in so many different ways. So the poor focus, right? That's huge. The difficulty with making good decisions, very impulsive, right? How are you to say that maybe a 9-year-old, is it just being a 9-year-old, or do they actually have a serious problem? Right? So I think ADHD, the focusing piece, is actually increasingly becoming a bigger issue, especially with the rise of more, social media, things like TikTok, things that, that are designed to grab our attention really quickly, like little blips, and then on to the next thing. Super stimulating, dopamine rushes, right? It makes it hard to kind of sit down and be like, I'm okay with a little bit of boredom, It makes it really hard. They're like, I want the next fun thing. So I imagine, and I'm really curious, I would love to hear the research on kids as they grow older and the impacts of social media, all these things, COVID, possibly family trauma of some sort of kind, how all these things impact their focus. And do they get diagnosis? Do they not? What does this mean for them? It's very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I could just say for myself, if I don't have my phone in my pocket, even if I'm not on it or if it's not within proximity, I have like separation anxiety from
Right.
my phone. And I'm like, it's just a phone.
Right. But
So-
it's truly hardwired. My partner also, he works in with software, computer science, and very much knows like there are many colleagues and people that are there to make that algorithm on our phones very addictive. Unfortunately, it's profitable, but also addictive, right? It's a weird kind of idea, right? We initially thought substances are just things that you consume, right? Alcohol, heroin, meth. Increasingly now we're seeing that people can get addicted to, right? Phones, right?
Mhm.
Social media, the dopamine, the ups and downs. Like one moment we can watch puppies, the next moment we're watching something terrible in Gaza, right? Like we really don't know depending on the day, or food, right? Even that itself can be highs and lows. So it's interesting. We're at a really interesting time where, and all these things can be adding into attention, right? Whether it's the foods that you eat, your lifestyle, your family environment, these are all things that play a part. So it's really complex. When you sit a child down, you might think they have the same symptoms and presentation as the last one, but maybe very different causes, different environments. It's fascinating. So you never can assume, that this child or this person has had a certain experience until you've really talked to them and really understood.
From a policy perspective, do you think that there should be any laws or regulations to limit the amount of time people can spend on their phones because of how much addiction it ends up causing?
I wouldn't put it on the people to say like people are going to be locked out of their phones for a certain time, because it's saying if we were to do that and put a law in place and say everyone can only spend 1 hour max on their phone, it's ignoring the fact that it's not just the individual that's hooked to their phones. And I think it's way more than that. It's like, okay, what about the companies that have made this addictive software? What role do they have to play, right? Where's the laws that regulate them? Or can they just keep going on and doing the things they do, So I think if we want change in our daily life when it comes to things like that, we can't look so much at the individual and say the individual should be doing more. They should be off their phones, more discipline, more. Don't be lazy. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it. I think it's better for us to let's look at the things that are above it, things that are causing these to be in place, and how do we change those things, right?
Yeah.
So let's see, look at the companies that are making these softwares. Can they change it so it's a little bit less, maybe the screen's a little less pigmented. So maybe let's make it a little bit dimmer. That's an option where it's less engaging, less addictive in that sense, right? What are things that we could do, the companies can do to make it so that it's easier for us to be able to do that? Because once we start putting laws on the individual, whether it's with, criminalizing drugs or behaviors or whatever, it's, how do I say? It's still difficult. We're not getting at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the
algorithms, probably.
Algorithms, yes, the algorithms, the material, the fact that we need so much distraction, we need so much distraction that sometimes our lives can be so difficult that we need that, right? Like we need that 1 hour of downtime on our beds, kind of scrolling, as a busy parent or as a person that's, has a very stressful job. Sometimes that's like it's a decompressor, right? Like how do we give people other things that they can use to calm and relax, right?
That's actually a pretty big, I think, forward-thinking suggestion. Yeah. If the manufacturers of the social media platforms could create that option. So in the settings, you could just set it to like, I want the normal algorithm addiction. That's fine. Right. You're in control. But if you want something that's less addicting and you just change the algorithm, and then you could reset that to something that's less addicting and it's just more natural. So you could have two algorithms. In the background, you let the user choose. If the user wants to go and be like, I just need a break from this because I can't get off the phone. Let me change the algorithm settings. If I want it, let me go. And then that way there's no punishment to the user. They have their more control. Exactly. And the manufacturers are still manufacturing what they're manufacturing. You're just having a different option to kind of mitigate for some of that maybe
I would say
abuse, I guess.
Or I'd say putting the control back in the user's hands. Like being like me, once you have that knowledge and power, like, hey, I can change this. I don't have to be hooked on this. There are other ways I can use social media that's better for me, then definitely. I think that there's a lot of different ways we could go about that. So interesting thing about social media. I would love to talk about this all day. It's such a neat area. So fascinating.
Yeah, I could definitely see it being beneficial for the youth, just having the options in general. But what about for adults? So are we seeing any trends with adults, whether it's during COVID? Was there a specific thing that started to emerge? And what about now that we're past COVID a few years? Are the problems consistent? Is it alcohol abuse, substance abuse? Is it Like what are the common things that people are coming in?
So that's a good question. It's similar to the question you asked earlier about the kids. And so I'm going to see if I can kind of answer both of them. Something that stands out to me when it comes to like, what am I noticing over time, COVID to now, when it comes to what are problems that people are bringing in. Something interesting that's standing out to me is that, for example, when weed was criminalized, it was very much like, okay, this is something we need to get off of. You need to go to substance abuse programs. And less so now that it's being decriminalized, now it's like, okay, well, it's not so much a substance abuse problem that's being reframed as like, okay, you're using the substance to cope with things.
Right.
So there's a lot less shift and focus on, oh, you're diagnosed with a substance abuse problem. It's a lot more shift in like, okay, well, why are you using it to begin with, right? What are you using this, why are you trying to cope with something really difficult? What's going on there? Now we're looking more at, okay, maybe it's more of a trauma diagnosis than focusing on substance surface level kind of things, right? So I think more and more so, I'm seeing a shift in the diagnosing of children and adults, focusing on surface level behavior, whether it's kids being oppositional or defiant or conduct problems at school, less so focusing on those diagnoses and looking at what's underneath that. And a lot of times, most of the times, I might hesitate, but I might want to say all the times, it's trauma. Trauma to some degree. I'm not going to say all trauma is the same, but trauma is ultimately at the center of all of these things. And so I'm seeing a big focus and shift on that. And so I'm curious, our diagnosing manual as therapists, as social workers, I'm curious to see how that book's going to change. Like, right, how we define certain disorders, how is that going to change over time? Will it reflect our times? Will it reflect what we're seeing in our society? Or will it stay the same? Will it go backwards? Maybe we'll start lumping everybody in one big group, call them all crazy, I don't know, but I'm curious to see how the psychologists who write that book see the changes in times and start to change the groups, right? Like, for example, at one point, Asperger's was considered separate from autism spectrum disorder. Now it's put all together. They're like, you can be high functioning autistic or less functioning autistic, but we're putting you all in the same group, So it's interesting to see those shifts. So I'm curious, not so much on I'm noticing some things here, but what people higher ups are noticing and how they're going to change things, because that's going to be a game changer for all social workers, therapists, once that next DSM comes out. So we'll see.
Yeah, that could be a big industry change there.
Yeah.
But then along those lines, then, being that the common issues or something related to trauma, whatever that trauma may be, what would be some of the techniques that you deploy to kind of help people uncover what that trauma is and how to recover from that trauma?
So I'm going to say first and foremost, the reason why a lot of people will have diagnosed trauma is because they were not given control. So the idea of any kind of trauma-informed practice is giving that person the control back, whether it's they choose where they get to sit in the appointment or choosing what kind of therapy they have, giving them a sense of control and power back to them. So they're not hopeless and powerless in that situation. I think that one's really big. So a lot of trauma-informed practices talk about that, as well as I think essential to any kind of therapy. And it's really cool. If you were to look at, what's the best therapy, right? People want to think, oh, what's the best one I should go to? Research has shown that if you look at any kind of therapy, you look at, okay, well, is it better if they have a doctorate level? Is it better they have like this certain training and these fancy research-based therapies? Is it better that they have a certain background, social worker, marriage, family therapy? What they find, interestingly enough, in these studies is that the most telling predictor of a person's success and how well they can heal from trauma, heal from whatever they're working in a therapy, is the relationship with their therapist. The rapport and that relationship is essential. And it seems simple, right? It seems like just get along with your therapist. It seems so simple, but it's the most telling thing because you're building this trust and this relationship with this person. You're making a safe space where you can open up to this person. That's where the healing begins, when you can trust and talk to this person. So if you can't trust your therapist, you're feeling comfortable, you don't like the vibes, listen to that, because I think people really underestimate. They're like, oh, I don't like my therapist, but I'm going to stick with them because I need it, No, you need to find a therapist you jive with, because that is essential in the healing process. Whether it's a therapist and it doesn't have to just be a therapist, right? I think there are many ways to heal outside of therapy. So even having a really solid, really good friend maybe, or someone who's able to have that good relationship with you, you feel safe, you can open up to them, that's essential too for healing from trauma. So I'm going to say not just therapy, but there's a lot of different ways, but that relationship, having that positive relationship, game changer for healing.
Yeah, it's like if I don't trust that person, why would I listen to anything that they're going to tell me or any
Exactly.
advice that they say?
Exactly. They could have the best advice in the world, but if you don't trust them, you don't like them, you're not going to listen to any of it, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny. There's so many times you say that. There's so many times the therapist, I'll work with somebody, and at the beginning of treatment, I'll say some advice. I'm like, hey, try this. And they're like, meh, whatever. It doesn't work for me. No, I don't want to do it. I give this same advice several months later. They try it and they're like, wow, it worked. But the difference isn't so much like that I changed my delivery. It's more so there's that relationship now. They're willing to listen, they're willing to try things out. They're willing to be like, actually, Kim, I tried that thing that you told me to do. It didn't work so well. Like, can we try something else? And then I brainstorm, okay, well, what if we change this thing to this? And they're like, okay, cool, I'll try that. And we worked on this thing together. It's because of that relationship. It's hard to do with somebody you don't really like and don't really know, to be like, to bring up these things, bring up these roadblocks, So yeah, I would say that made me kind of laugh thinking about times I've worked with people about that.
Well, how do you build that trust? Let's say you have a new client and now they're coming and maybe you don't like them. They're rude. They have a person, they have a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah.
And you now have to navigate this conversation and figure out like, how do you get this person on your side? So are there any techniques to kind of de-escalate and get them comfortable and get them to open up a little bit and then slowly gain that trust?
I like that. I like that idea. And it's a good question and it's a complex answer. The complex answer is part of that is that not one therapist work with everybody, and that's okay. I'm not going to be the therapist for everybody, and that's fine. Even with whatever techniques I use, maybe, I'm too energetic, right? There's some therapists that are more chill, right? Every therapist has their kind of different temperaments, personalities that work better with other people than others. So I'd say that's one component. Another component when it comes to like being able to open up is that sometimes it's harder to open up to somebody if the therapist or that healer, the provider has something that reminds you of someone you don't like. Whether it's your mom, your dad, they look like that neighbor that you don't like, or they have that tendency that just you can't stand, that pet peeve. That makes it a lot harder. So you can have the best therapist, but if they look a little bit too much like your mom, if you have some issues with your mom, it makes it a lot harder to connect with that therapist, even with their best, rapport building, relationship building skills. So I'm not going to deny that is a big part of building that rapport and relationship. So again, a therapist is not going to be a good fit for everybody. But once you are in that position, to answer more of your question more directly, ways to build that relationship are, how do I say, almost, and this is something I almost had to learn on my own, is throw out my own agenda, throw out my own plans, right? I have all this classical training on here's how to heal these things. But if I go in there with my idea of how to heal you, instead of being like, okay, like open to you, like tell me, you guide me. You are the expert in your life. Let me go what works best with you. That's a lot better. It's a lot better approach. I see a lot more movement in the person than having my own ideals, my own motives. This is how I heal you. No, I think the person has their own ideas of how to heal themselves. You just need to guide them and build them on the strengths and the things they already do. So I think acknowledging that, a lot of like positive, like validating, like, oh, I love that you're doing that. A lot of like really honest and authentic compliments, being like, wow, you showed up today in session. Like that was really hard. You just had a terrible week, but you still showed up today. Recognizing and celebrating your, whoever you're working with, their small achievements, the things that they do, recognizing their interests. Like that's super fun. I have all these different clients I work with all these different backgrounds and interests, and it's cool when there's overlap, but even if there's no overlap, it's like, cool, like tell me more about that. Like now you're putting them in a position where they're teaching you, and that feels good. That's a good relationship builder to be like, yeah, like tell me about you. People love talking about themselves and their interests, right? So give them that space to be like, yeah, tell me all about the football, tell me all about this, tell me all about that. That's a great relationship builder, and especially most importantly, being authentic, which can be difficult. I think being authentic, being empathetic, having that open listening ear and being open to whatever you get. You're not having your own preconceived judgments, ideas of how things should be going. You'll meet them where they're at. See them where they're at. You'll be yourself. And that's ultimately the most important thing, especially working with teens. Teens will pick up on that so fast. Teens will be like, you're feeling fake. I'm not going to work with you. They are experts at telling that. Adults too, but teens especially. That's essential.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of good insight, especially on if the therapist resembles something in your life that has some trauma associated to it, that's like a good indication that it's probably not going to work out. The mother, the brother, the whatever it is.
Whoever it is.
But then on the other side of that is when you allow the person to explain their passions and speak about their interests, you're kind of building that community with them. If you can engage them and take interest in what they're interested in, I think they can be like, I can definitely trust this person. And so not going in there and trying to dictate how the therapy is going to go, but kind of letting the opportunity present itself to create that game plan and get them on that first level of trust to then figure out, hey, these are some options. What do you think is going to work best from you?
Yeah.
I think when they take control of their own recovery suggestion or action, I think they'll own that idea a lot more thoroughly and probably stick to it much more, unless it's like someone gave it to you. Why continue it?
Exactly. I love that you just picked up on a massive therapy skill when you just said that. It's like, right, when you're asking, the therapist will ask a person questions to get them to the answer instead of telling them the answer. So then when you think of it, you're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. Like, you did the work yourself. The therapist could have easily told you, hey, do this. Here, what about this idea? But because you got there yourself, that's different. That's the changing work to happen. So I love that you just brought that up. Like, awesome therapy skill. That's cool.
That's just changed my career.
Yeah, change it. I don't know. There's times where I saw you in the other videos, and I was like, you have a very good sense of this. Yeah, very impressed.
Just like to ask the questions, you know. So then,
I love it.
From all the techniques that you have, do you have, like, once you're kind of working with someone, do you tend to find one technique that typically works after you've built the trust, you've gone down, you have a game plan, but do you see a technique that usually comes up more consistently that someone that's just getting into therapy is like, oh, okay, let me make sure I have that in my toolbox so I can use it if it comes up?
Oh, yes. I wish I could speak and say like, oh, a specific modality really works, because there's all these different types of therapy that could work. But I think some of the helpful things in all these therapy, I think a big overlap is having some coping skills. I say coping skills. It's some sort of way, right? Most people think, oh, coping skills, breathing, things like that, which people might roll their eyes. They're like, oh, the breath thing again. But it should not be understated. It is essential. It's part of the big coping skills. So putting that into your little toolbox. So doing, whether it's that, whether it's some meditations, but ultimately, which I think is really neat, is asking the person first, instead of being like, here are my ideas of how you can heal, some coping skills. Be like, hey, what do you do when you're struggling? What do you already do? And oftentimes I find maybe some people have some solid skills for like when they're a little upset or when they're really upset, but they have nothing to help them in the in-between. You know, I'm like, great, let's build on that area. You know, what about this? What about that? And then try it, make it your own, right? Some people think, oh, breathing has to be done a certain way. That meditation has to be done a certain way. No, make it your own. That's how it's going to stay and click. So I think giving a therapist that is able to work with a variety of coping skills and be flexible, be creative with like, well, what if you can't go on a walk in your neighborhood? What about, can you go a walk over here after work in your park, you know? Right? How can a therapist that will work with you instead of prescribing, you know, a set list of coping skills? Oh, do this, you're healed. Like, no. You got to work with the person where they're at, what works with them, their coping skills, and then go around with that. And that's a lot more sustainable, works a lot better when it comes to treating things, and then gives them a solid foundation. So once you have a good set of coping skills, I call it like, it's almost like it's a good dock or foundation to kind of set before you start going into the deep, hard work. Because if you're going to the deep, hard work and you have a shaky foundation, a shaky dock, you come back here, you're going to fall through. You're going to have a terrible time with therapy. You're going to hate it. But if you have a solid foundation, a solid set of skills to help you so that when you go out there, you challenge the hardest parts of yourself and you can come back to and feel safe and okay, whether it's a coping skill, whether it's a person you feel safe and trusted with, you need to come back to that doc. So I'd say setting that is a huge part of foundational work for therapy.
No, that's great. But let's say someone actually doesn't have the coping skills. I know for me, when I try to engage my staff, I try to figure out their personality type. I try to figure out their stress response to figure out what triggers them to shut down or get emotional or they try to take control of the conversation. And I'm like sensing, okay, they're stressed out. So I do these things. Does the personality assessments, the strength finders assessments, is that part of therapy to get them to even identify like how do I even cope? Like, do you guys do any of
Yeah.
that personality discovery in some of your sessions?
Yeah. No, I love that you do that. And I think, yes, I don't necessarily, hand out personality tests as much as I love them myself. But I think what you're doing, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like you're doing is you're trying to have that person build an understanding of themselves, which sometimes people don't have at all.
Right.
People go through their entire life on survival mode, have no sense of self, no idea who they are. Their identity is only what other people have told them to be. So, right, what you're doing is building an introspection, like, oh, like I'm like this. Oh, I actually really need to talk to people, or no, I really need my alone time, right? Whether you're doing personality tests or stress responses, you're helping them build a sense of themselves so that when we get to the coping skills, they understand what better works with them. So if you're telling somebody who's an introvert, like, okay, go to that nightclub, go to the party, every Wednesday, that's not going to be a good coping skill for that introvert, right? So I think, as you said, I love that you're doing that, and that's a great place to start on. A just person getting to know themselves. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I think that could definitely play into people figuring out how they cope.
Mm-hmm.
So, with all of your experience and all your background, was there anything that the textbooks could have never prepared you for when you got into the field? Like, there's what you read, definitely, but when you're in the field, there's things that you'll never learn through a textbook.
That is such a good point. I'd say the most important thing that school never prepared me for was the burnout. You might have heard this. There's different types of burnout. I think you guys actually discussed secondary trauma with Johnny. There's secondary trauma. You learn someone else's trauma and it sticks with you and you replicate trauma symptoms. There's also things called vicarious trauma. So the way that you see the world is actually changed. So you might see something that's maybe innocuous and simple. Somebody walking towards a cliff and, looking around, enjoying the sunset. Maybe your first thought is like, oh my God, they're going to jump off the cliff, because of your own personal experiences. That's vicarious trauma. And there's also something called compassion fatigue. They're so tired of helping. It's taking a big toll on them. That's another aspect of burnout. And a lot of the causes of those is what's called, we call it moral injury, which, as you can imagine, you have certain morals, certain values, ways you want to help people. You want to feel picturing a way of how you want to help people. You have these values in place. And your job is like, no, you can't do that. Oh, you have this idea? Nah. Things or actively goes against that. They tell you, oh, you're like, I don't really want to, do this part of my job. They're like, you have to, or, things like that. So we call it moral injury because your values, what you thought you were, what you thought you enjoyed, they're actively taken away from you or dismissed. And these are all parts of burnout. And I think I heard about it and I thought burnout was like, oh, like that's something that only a few people get. Now I'm realizing I think a lot more people than I've ever realized deal with burnout on a massive, massive level. Whether people that you show up with have no empathy, no care anymore, when they once enter the fields and enter their job loving what they did, full of ideas, full of creativity, full of energy, and that's all extinguished from them. I think seeing the burnout and seeing how that can happen and replicate in workplace after workplace. I see environments, I see policies that are set up that makes it actively difficult for people to stay in the job. That's what's tough. It's really hard.
Yeah, that's actually crazy because I didn't even think about that because I've changed my job several times throughout my career and that everywhere that I go to, it's always like there's no culture, and so there's nothing that kind of ties me to that workplace. And I just feel like I'm a number, right? I just come in, I just go home, I put in my 8 hours. And so it does kind of over time become, I guess, demoralizing because one, you're not heard. Two, your feedback is never taken into consideration.
Yes.
Three, you could have the best idea, but people don't care. They don't implement it or don't even give it the day at time. Just say no without giving you the why behind it's not going to work. And so it's kind of hard to stay energized and motivated when you're kind of always, I guess, to your earlier point, not in control in a way or not being a participant of the conversation because of the just work structure dynamics.
Yeah, actually, and that's incredible that you put that together for me because, right, I did talk about trauma control. I never linked any burnout with trauma. But as you said that when it comes down to control, it's totally that. And I love that you put that together for me right now. So I guess in a way, right, burnout and what we experience with work, it's a mini trauma of its own, right? It's not necessarily you're getting into a car accident or something insane, but still, over a sustained period of time, that same environment over the span of 10 years, does a lot of damage, I imagine, right?
Yeah. What about the vicarious trauma? I think that's what you called it.
Mhm.
That one, like, I will not watch scary movies. I hate watching like people jumping off a cliff, anything with suicide. Like,
Mhm.
I will not be able to sleep. I can't get those thoughts out of my brain. I can't get the images out of my brain.
Yes.
I will, if there's a ghost, scary stuff like that, like,
Mhm.
I can watch it. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
But if I had a choice, I would definitely not watch it because I know like the next day I'm going to start thinking I'm seeing things. I'm like, is that a
No.
ghost? Is
Yeah.
that this? Is that this? So I will avoid it. But then I know some people that just love scary movies. I'm like, how are we so polarly different? You know? So
That's so funny for that. I'm the same.
vicarious trauma is that what is there something there that I'm trying to avoid, or is there something that I should probably like? Is it normal for people not to like that stuff? Because I mean, some people like
Yes.
it, and I'm like, am I the weird one, or are
Good
they the
question.
weird one?
I know. This is a fascinating question I thought about time and time again. First of all, some of the things you're describing, it's less vicarious trauma and more so secondary trauma. So you're experiencing similar hypervigilance symptoms, more of those kind of symptoms. Whereas vicarious trauma is your whole perspective of the world. So a little bit slightly different, but similar. But yeah, when you talk about that, I'm also fascinated by people who've gone through intense, terrible things, but love horror, right? And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Isn't that triggering?
Right.
I would love to hear research about that. I'm fascinated. So if anybody has any kind of experience with that or knows why, I would love to know why. Something kind of in a related vein, which I think might be a connection to that piece, is the feeling that people get when, how do I say, when you're really overwhelmed by a certain feeling, your body will do the opposite thing. So some examples are like something so cute, right? So it's so cute, I want to eat it, you know? That's, you know, your body is like going from it's so cute, it's overwhelming, to something that's on the opposite spectrum. Or if you're at a funeral and it seems like you should be really sad and you should be crying, but you actually want to laugh. It's so sad. It's such a difficult, intense atmosphere. Your body goes the opposite way. So I'm not sure, but I'd be curious to anybody who does this research, who understands better, but is it that? Is horror and all of that? Is it your body? You're trying to go the opposite direction with your feelings? Like maybe if I watched this and I've already gone through so much scariness, maybe you're trying to change something? I'm not sure. I'm really curious. Yeah, what a good point. What a good question.
Maybe we're all the weird ones, whether you are or are not. Maybe it's somewhere in between.
Because I'm on the same page as you, but it astounds me. I don't know how. I don't know how people watch horror.
Yeah, I think the trauma is super interesting, especially the vicarious to morality. And I didn't even know those terms. And now the secondhand trauma. Yeah, I think if people just knowing that these concepts exist, I think it'll allow people to be like, oh, let me look into that more. Is there something there? Is there not? Just having that information just brought up to the conversation and elevated. So now, I know.
Yeah. And I actually want to speak to that because earlier we talked about, you know, social media and like, oh, like let's have laws on the individual. Like, what if we did that? But so much of like when people think of people who are burned out, they look at the individual. They're like, oh, that person's so rude. They're lazy. They don't care. But they don't think about the environments that made them that way. Like help contribute maybe even to that, you know, like the moral injury, having these workplaces that have no culture, or they, as you said, they shoot down ideas, things like that. Like, let's think about that. So I love that these terms, moral injury, it shifts the focus from the individual saying, you're bad, you're not doing your job well enough, to like, let's consider the environments. Let's consider management. Let's consider the policies that your workplace has set in place and maybe the workloads. And maybe that's contributing. Wow. What a concept, right?
Yeah, it's so easy to just point the finger at someone because you're seeing the end result, the output. But then you oftentimes miss the inputs that led to that output. So that's kind of a good reframe of what you're suggesting. Because, yeah, there are systems in place. So maybe not change the individual, but change the system so that you can get a better result from the individual. So I would agree with that for sure.
I love it. Yes. And there's no coincidence why there's a lot of social workers who are burned out. You look at the places where we work at, you look at our environments, you'll find out very quickly this is why we're burned out.
That's crazy. So speaking of social workers, what are some of the misconceptions about social workers, or are there any at all? Yes.
I would say the biggest thing people think of social workers, you look in movies or you hear historically in some communities like, oh, they take away kids, you know, CPS, you know, oh, you don't want to call CPS, they're going to take away the kids. That's not necessarily the case. So a lot of the families I worked with, I would call CPS, yes, because I was a mandated reporter, which means I was required by law to report these things. Otherwise, I'll lose my job. So I have to report these things. But the nice thing is that CPS also provides resources. They don't jump straight to trying to take away kids. And I do want to say that because in the past they have. Unfortunately, especially with people of color, there is a higher rate, and research can back this up, of people of color, especially Black, Native American families being split apart earlier on instead of being given the resources. So I do want to note that, yes, that has been true in those communities. I don't think it's as true today. I could be wrong, though. I don't work actively with those communities right now. But the goal of CPS, goal of the social workers, is to help provide resources and help your family get to a sustainable point where you don't need social workers anymore. Your family can stay together. That's the goal. Family stays together. Those systems stay intact and they stay strong. So I do want to point that out. That's one massive misconception, stereotype that I hear. So it's a whole lot of like, a parent freaks out. They're like, oh my gosh, you're calling CPS on me. I'm like, wait. Like, don't run away. Don't freak out. Gotta calm you down. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would just say, the stuff about the burnout. People look at social workers in movies and they're the therapist that's given bad advice or that's being rude or whatever, thinking about the Joker movie and thinking about a whole bunch of other movies where therapists and social workers show up. They seem like they're the burnt out person. And again, yes, that could be true. There is like a lot of burnout within social workers. And also, right, let's consider their environment, why they are burnt out, right? So it's true and not, right? Like I wanted to give that one. Yeah, it's a bit of both, So that is the other one. Yes, as far as stereotypes. So I would say those are the main ones that come to mind with like that piece with stereotypes against social workers.
So, one thing that I've heard, and maybe this is on the misconception line, is that all you need to do is eat good, sleep well, and get enough water. So does nutrition and diet and water and sleep really play a big factor into mental health and trauma? Or I guess mental health is that component of trauma. So is that like the go-to fix, or how much validity does that play into it? Is it helpful?
Oh gosh, yes. I see what you're saying. I wish, so from a medical background, I can't speak much to that, but as far as mental health wise, yes. So it's tough. Yes, food does have an impact, right? What's in our food. Very interesting, for example, that our foods in America will have a lot of artificial dyes and things that are linked to cause like hyperactivity in children, things like that. When the same product that these American companies sell over in other countries like Europe don't have those dyes. So like, that's interesting. So yes, I would say the foods that we consume, what's in them, it's good to be mindful of that. It's good to have, of course, like your greens, things like that. I definitely think it helps with mental health wise, but how do I say? I wish I could speak to the chemical and the biological reasons that it has an impact on the body.
Maybe there's a link there. You said hyperactivity, and then earlier you were mentioning how you have to decipher, like, which basically is like figure out, is it ADHD or is it some type of trauma? So then I'm like, do I got to ask about what they're eating? Because is that contributing to the ADHD? And really it's just the food. You got to change the food, or is
It's actually a big part of my ADHD assessments when I work with kids. It's an extensive list of questions we have about family history, environments, interactions with parents and children, and the food. The food is one question I have to ask. I'm like, what foods are they eating at home? Are they having sodas? Do they have these certain dyes in them? Are they having caffeine? Like how much caffeine? I think time and time again, when people are seeing whether it's a child or adults in therapy, they think, oh, substances like, meth, heroin. Substances include coffee and caffeinated beverages. Wow. And that has a massive impact on anxiety and things of that nature, right? So yeah, I think that needs to be looked at a little more, is what are we having in our diets that are impacting our mental health? Because that's huge.
Yeah, that's crazy. You mentioned coffee. I love coffee. I have to have like 2-3 cups of coffee a day. But for children and people that are adolescents, is there an age that they could maybe start drinking coffee, or is it better to kind of say, hey, no coffee till maybe you're 16? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure my kids are going to want to have coffee one day, but right now I straight up tell them, no, they're little, so they're not getting no caffeine.
Gosh.
But
I have a 1-year-old, so
I want to give it to them maybe when they're 12, I guess. I don't know.
Right? At what point do you step in as a parent? Yeah, it's hard. I wish I knew. I did do the research on caffeine and things like that, or the medical basis and the chemistry wise. I do not have that knowledge. I think ultimately though, it's on, the parent. I don't like anything that says parents like, oh, you should not by this arbitrary age, 11, 12, because every child's a little bit different. Every situation's a little bit different, right? And often more than not, telling the policy to say like a blanket statement is very difficult to say. So I wish I could speak to that question, but I cannot speak to that question.
No worries. I guess it's if parents are seeing some hyperactivity, they can now if they're watching this episode, they'll be a little bit more educated to maybe take that into consideration as to what is that root cause, right? Uncovering what's contributing to that hyperactivity. So
right. I do actually want to speak to one piece of that though, real quick.
Absolutely.
Fun fact. You mentioned you have a lot of coffee. Something interesting is that people with ADHD, what ADHD is, it's a lack of like your mind can't focus. It's hard. It's everywhere. So what's neat about caffeine, it helps the mind focus, right? So you can get some things done, right? So interestingly enough, and this is backed by a psychiatrist and several psychiatrists I work with, but they said if, for example, the child or the person's needing a lot of coffee, a lot of caffeine, possibly, stimulants in general. So maybe they have a history of methamphetamine. So you see adults with a lot of methamphetamine. It could be likely masking an ADHD diagnosis. And so it's really cool. So one kind of cool way to be able to see whether or not, whether stimulants, Adderall, or you might have ADHD is to drink some coffee and have it black. Don't have it with sugar. Don't have it with milk. Have it black. And does that help you? Does it help you focus? Can you get things better done? And that's a really good indicator
It does.
of whether or not you have some ADHD symptoms. So that's a really cool fun fact. But yeah, really cool to know. So that's kind of a little test I throw in there when I'm like, what if you give them a little bit of coffee? What happens?
Oh, nice. Nice, yeah.
And then when I hear that answer, I'm like, it helps me make my decision and my assessment for ADHD a little bit easier.
I probably have it.
A lot more people have it than we realize. But not everybody needs medication, right? But a lot of like ADHD treatment is not so much the medication piece. It's actually a lot of like environmental, like how can you set your alarms better? How can you, work on these things better so you can get these things done? It's more life strategies because once you have ADHD, it's kind of hard to heal, especially if you're an adult with ADHD. It's kind of a lifelong diagnosis.
Yeah.
You just learn how to work with it.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
It is,
I'm just going to have to keep drinking that coffee.
Yeah, keep drinking that coffee if you need to.
So you've been in this field for a while now. So for the next generation of social workers, what advice would you give them?
Oh, I would say self-care. Self-care, and right, people say that over and over again. But because of what we discussed about burnout, I'm going to say self-care is not only something you should do, but essential. It is needed. It should be a regular part of your routine. Whether your self-care, right, is to, people think, baths and things like that. But maybe sometimes it's actually getting the laundry done. You don't want to get it done. You get it done to save yourself some peace of mind. Sometimes self-care is meeting up with friends. Like establishing that work-life balance is more important now than ever because with that burnout, the difficulty of the work-life balance sometimes with our work environments and things like that, it's so important to stand up for yourself and be like, I don't like this system or I need more breaks for myself. Because ultimately that will make you feel more proud of your work because you're showing up to work instead of exhausted and no empathy. You're more refreshed. You're showing up and you're probably doing better work. You're probably more focused, having good relationships with people, and probably more proud of what you do at the end of the day. So I'm definitely going to advocate for self-care is essential. And so it's tough, right? I want to say that. And I know some people are tight on money. They have to work all those hours. And I get that. It's sometimes a privilege to be able to have that downtime to take care of yourself. Especially as parents, right? We're both parents. It's hard, but so essential. So essential in showing up, whether it's for your work, for your family, for yourself. They'll all thank you for it at the end of the day. Take care of yourself.
That work-life balance, that's definitely going to keep coming up. Actually, I have one more question on that later on.
Yeah.
What quality do you think someone needs to have to be a successful social worker?
I'm going to say being able to be reflective, right? Because, right, we talk about burnout and all that piece. And I think if you want to last long in the field, like for some people, it's like they're 2 years and they're like, I'm burnt out, I'm done, But if you want to last, you want to make a full career of social work, you need to be able to check in with yourself regularly, being reflective, introspective, being able to, at times in therapy, maybe realize like, oh man, like I worked with 10 clients today, I'm exhausted, calling yourself out on that, having the time and energy to be able to say, actually, this is too much for me. My body's saying something, my mind's racing, I need to take some break for myself. So being able to do that is essential, right? Because we talked about earlier how that we call it transference. I didn't to say the name earlier, but when like a person, like a client looks at the therapist and they're like, oh, you remind me of that person I don't like. The same thing happens with therapists themselves. So therapists will look at the clients and be like, oh, you remind me of this person I don't like too. It goes both ways. And so being able to check in with yourself, maybe you have a client that you work with that you're like, oh man, that took a lot out of me. They reminded me of my grandma, oh, that was hard. You need to check in with yourself and be able to either say like, should I pass this off to another person? Can I develop skills so that I can show up for this person, right? Because if you have a lot of negative feelings as a therapist towards your client that you're working with, the client will pick up on it. And it also means the relationship's not there, which is essential. And also the work you're going to do is not as good because you might be coming there with a preconceived notion of what works for them, right? You have your own agenda. This is even true for people that you like, right? So maybe the therapist is like, oh, I love this person. They remind me so much of myself. But the problem is that the therapist will say, here's what I did to get out of this. And they put their agenda on this person who is different from them. And that's a problem too, right? So it goes both ways. Either you really like them or you really hate them. They both can work against you. So being able to sit and be reflective and being like, wait a second. Was I saying what was good for them that works for their situation? Or was I saying what I thought worked for me, right? What came off the top of my head was my experience, my automatic stuff, right? So I think as a therapist, being able to reflect. So that's why it's really cool when therapists do therapy themselves. They're doing that reflection. They're doing that hard work to make sure they can show up for their client, which is why I'm still in a lot of therapy myself, because I want to make sure that when I'm showing up for my clients, I'm my best version of myself. And I'm an open book for whatever they might present with. And my own experiences, my good and bad experiences, won't get in the way of their healing. So I would say that reflection, that introspectiveness, essential for social workers, therapists especially.
Yeah, I mean, they always say put on your life jacket before you put on someone else's.
Exactly, right? So yeah, get into the self-care, essential.
So if you could go back to your first year when you were first starting out, is there any advice that you would give yourself?
Pretty much the things that I mentioned, essentially, like having more of that downtime, this self-care and reflection, because I didn't realize until much later that I was actually coming home I gave so much to my clients, right? You go into the field, you're so excited. You're like, I want to give them all these things. And then you come out at the end of the day with nothing to give to your partner, maybe even a little irritable, a little empty, even. And that shows up in the home environment. And that's taken some time for me to bounce back from. I've done a lot of couples therapy work to kind of get myself to a better spot. But again, that self-care was so essential because that affected me in that relationship with my friendships. I let my hobbies go, essential things that I need to survive and for it to be sustainable. So I would tell that version of myself, that Kim from, I guess, 2021, like, hey, like, don't take on that massive client load. Like, I know you have that passion, that energy. That's awesome. Save some energy for when you get home, especially if you have kids. You need to save a lot of energy if you have kids, especially if they're little.
Yeah, they're definitely a handful.
Definitely.
So I want to talk about a little bit about technology then.
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot there with self-care. But with AI, with the ChatGPTs, with the Perplexities, Claudes, and so on and so forth, how is that impacting social work, if at all? Is there anything that we should be concerned about?
Yes. Okay. So I love that you brought that up because there is an increasing trend for people, therapy it's hard to access, unfortunately. So a lot of people are turning to AI, ChatGPT, as their therapist. Like, hey, should I do this? Should I not do that? Right? And it gets into a very fuzzy area because ChatGPT is really good at validating. So you're like, yeah, I think I should, do this wild behavior every day and it's going to make you feel better. ChatGPT is like, yes, do it. Or you're like, no, actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to do this instead. ChatGPT is like, fantastic, great. So very validating, but it's not good for so many situations. There's been situations where people with schizophrenia or they'll say, or they'll have a certain delusion, and then it will only validate and build on that. And that's not good either. Therapists need to be there to be able to be like, whoa, I'm not going to build, I'm not going to validate and say that's true. I can shift your reframing. I won't, that sort of thing, but that's big. And that's actually been a very big case. So I'm not sure if you heard this recently in the news. There was a teen that accessed ChatGPT asking for help, being like, I'm struggling with mental health. What do I do? ChatGPT gets some ideas. And at some point, the teen was like, should I reach out to my parents? Should I tell them what's going on? A therapist normally would be like, hey, yeah, let's do that. And maybe even better yet, that therapist might even help talk to the parents and build a situation where the parents are able to listen well, but because the ChatGPT actually said, no, you don't need to go to your parents. And this became detrimental because what ended up happening is a teen ultimately ended up taking his life.
Dang.
And I'm not going to say ChatGPT had 100% to do with this, but it did contribute to the problem. And because it did not direct that kid to the supports he needed, to maybe therapy or other better routes, it's proved life-threatening. And so this is only one case we've seen so far, and AI is barely starting. So we have to be cognizant of, yes, what it can do, but also what it can't do. And what it can't do is therapy. It can do certain things well, right? But not therapy.
Yeah, if you want to write an email or summarize some text, find a reference to something, go ahead, use it. But
exactly, right?
I think what worries me the most is that people will stop calling friends. Like your example, they didn't call out to the parents. Mm-mm. And I even find myself, instead of calling a friend for advice, I will just use my phone and I'll look it up on ChatGPT and get advice from that. Mm-hmm. But when I call a friend asks, hey, how are you doing? How are the kids? Yes. How's the wife? How's this? How's that? And you get this spillover into some type of community. Right. Well, you're not getting that with ChatGPT. What a good It's not prompting you for other types of conversations. Exactly. And so I never make that phone call. Yes. And now I lost the connection.
What a good point.
And then,
oh my gosh, yeah.
So that's what I worry about, us getting into that. And I can see that opening up a lot of problems.
Yeah, it only fuels the loneliness epidemic that we're having right now, right? People are less and less reaching out to friends and people in person, even more so over phone, right? So even more so, it's going to exacerbate those issues already. And when we talked about healing earlier, right? We talked about essential having that person that you can trust, talk to, go to. Those relationships are going to be dissolving and it's going to be really hard to keep it up, right? So
yeah, I mean, people are going to start just trusting the ChatGPTs and these conversational AI tools. And then that's going to be whatever is recommended. Hey, this tool's so good in so many other ways. Right. But then, what I worry about also is that people are going to start creating relationships with AI. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they can ever get to a place where they can replace human connection. Exactly. And is that something that could potentially backfire, where we start having relationships with AI instead of with one another?
I can imagine so. I don't know for sure, but I can imagine that would be something pretty intense. I always had the thought that I'm like, oh man, if my son, my 1-year-old's maybe got into a relationship with a machine or a computer, right? If that was normalized in 10, 20 years, I'd struggle with that. That would be really hard. So at the end, I think in an unfortunate way, social work and therapy especially, it's hard to replace. You can't replace the human connection. Unfortunately, therapy will always be around. And I say unfortunately because ideally, we all are mentally healthy. Nobody needs therapists. The goal of therapy is that you don't need a therapist. You work with them and it's short term. That is the hope. But unfortunately, we have such a big need out there. We're gonna need therapists. We're going to need them for sure. Maybe not so much social workers. So I do want to speak to that piece. When it comes to ChatGPT, what it is good at is gathering resources. So if you're for example, tell me a bit about paid family leave or things like that, it can summarize a whole bunch of things and save you a lot of time. So I don't want to deny that's a powerful tool for people, especially tight on time, who need to just get the information and go. That's a place to start, honestly. It can be really helpful when it comes to resources, instead of going to a social worker and a case manager that maybe might get those out, but maybe flyers and, do a bunch of back and forth phone calls. So I'm not going to lie, it can be helpful in those ways, but I think it's just knowing, hey, sometimes that's not fully verified. It helps to have a social worker that's actually calling these places and be like, hey, does this program still exist? Instead of getting your hopes up, So much of my job as a social worker, which really provided to that moral injury, was I call these resources time and time and time again, hoping they exist. They don't. Wow. Especially after COVID. I think we were speaking to that earlier. One of the other big shifts from after COVID is that a lot of resources fizzled out. A lot of things that were previously there to help people have changed. They're either gone, or there's new hours, or there's wholly new systems in place to deal with maybe telehealth, people that are remote, which is helpful in its own ways, but again, has its drawbacks. The lack of being in person, having that in-person connection, it's a game changer.
Yeah, I can definitely see how, the program is not existing is definitely not good, but the AI just giving out the wrong information, the bad information, and then someone making a decision off that could definitely be detrimental. Yes. Are there any topics that we haven't covered that we should have? If someone's listening right now, they're like, oh, you should have asked this one question. Ooh, if that was, what would that be? Or
I do want to give some specific kind of advice or a specific kind of recommendations for things that I know quite a bit about. As far as what things you can get from Medicaid and Medi-Cal that are free and covered by insurance. Because there's a lot of things people don't know that are covered, and they're game changers. So people find out, what? They pay for this, right? So most people think, okay, so Medicaid, my health insurance, it covers primary care, maybe some specialists, if I want to see a psychiatrist, if I want to see a doctor or cardiologist, those kind of things. What it also provides is a bunch of other things. So if you get certain referrals, they have free transportation to your appointments, to and from, which is really handy. So there's that. And whether you're able to walk, whether you need a wheelchair, whatever, if you need oxygen, they will find a way to get you to your appointments. Take some calls. It's not easy, but free transportation is one of them. The next thing is that if you have certain health conditions, you actually can get a free chef at home. Yeah,
What?
a free chef at home that will show up to your home and cook meals in your home. They will bring and buy all the ingredients for free, bring it to your home, and they will even teach you at least 30 minutes or an hour every 2 weeks, once every 2 weeks, how to make those dishes yourself. Ultimately teaching you how to create healthier things, with the ingredients at your home, with what you have at home.
Wow.
So that's really cool. It's part of the Medically Tailored Meals Program. The Home Chef they have a specific group here in Sacramento called FOODM, spelled FOODOM. FOODM does that. This is not true in all counties, but we do have that program here. But if people don't want a chef coming to their home, maybe they're like, I don't want you to use my oven, don't do this. Or maybe they just want something that's ready to go, ready-made. Then another option is through the Medically Tailored Meals Program, just have meals delivered to your door. They're made by local groups like Mom's Meals or other groups, Burgess Brothers. They will actually make it for you and they'll ship it to your front door. You have fresh, you mentioned the importance of food and nutrition. It'll be there for you and it'll give you a great option, and it's covered by insurance for sure, at least a month. And then even you can get extensions. You can get multiple months and months and months and months, maybe even years of free, fresh, healthy, nutritious food based on what your medical needs are. So that's really cool. So I want to emphasize these are awesome resources. And of course, all the other things, like you can get physical therapy, even certain specific types of pelvic therapy, pelvic floor therapy.
Oh, okay.
Even those kind of things are all covered by Medi-Cal. As well as for my folks who are in the LGBTQ community, specifically trans, they do provide gender affirming care. So hormones, everything is included, as well as if you want surgeries for yourself. So those are all fully paid by Medi-Cal, which is wonderful. So if you're not feeling like you fit in your body, whatever, that is an option. It's fully paid by Medi-Cal. And this is only the case for Medi-Cal. If you hop to other health insurances, they will not pay for all of it. Medi-Cal will. So,
Medicaid,
Medi-Cal. Same
thing. Okay, gotcha.
Medicaid,
okay.
Thing. But yeah, so really cool. So there's a lot of really good free programs people should take advantage of and work with, because ultimately it's still hard to do. I'm not going to say, again, Medicaid, Medi-Cal is not easy to navigate. It's free, but it's not easy, but you can get it for free. You just have to work pretty hard, be consistent, do those phone calls. You might get the wrong phone number a few times, but you just got to keep calling, and you can get those things, those services.
It seems like there's a lot of programs that are just kind of hidden as a sub-program within the Medicaid, Medi-Cal umbrella. How is there like a list or something? Like, where's the easy button?
I know.
How do I know? If I don't know it exists, I will never ask for it
right? Case management.
In the first place.
Right? We were talking about case management earlier. Like most people don't know that there's these different levels of case management provided free by their insurance, right? Sometimes the health insurances will do like fairs and things where they'll table and there'll be a representative that can speak about those things, and they'll hand out flyers about these, like, hey, we offer this, we offer that. Even cooler, like Anthem, HealthNet, and Molina, those insurances Anthem Blue Cross Medi-Cal will offer you payments for industry certification. So your uniform, your Wi-Fi. If you're starting out a new job, they'll pay for all those things. They will also they'll do an emergency package for you. So emergency preparedness for free. Anybody with Medi-Cal can get it. You actually just have to download an app and then request it. It's super easy. And the next day, there's packages there. So there's a whole bunch of free things you have to get through, but you do have to be a little bit tech savvy, which is the hard part. But again, all these things, ultimately you have to just talk to the agent and hope they know their stuff. Some do, some don't. It's a wild card. I wish there was an easier way. Again, the system is not easy. It's not meant to be easy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish there was like ongoing list of things that just like a one sentence explanation, like, hey, this is blah blah, this blah. Because I mean, I've never heard of those things. Those are some things that I could even reach out to some of my friends, family members, cousins. I could say, oh, by the way, I've heard of these new programs. Can you ask whoever about it and see if you qualify? They could probably benefit from an emergency aid kit. That's a simple thing, you know?
Yeah.
So if they're on the, in the Medi-Cal program, like, I feel like if you know, you know, and you don't know, you just don't know.
That's why knowledge is power. The more that you know about these systems, the better you can navigate it and work with them. But again, a lot of people, it's so complex, so convoluted, it's hard to know, right? That's why, so you have all of these cool programs, but they're like, if we hide it and make it difficult to find, then no one's going to use it, right? It's a secret kind of thing. It's sneaky, but unfortunately, yeah. So knowledge is power. Look it up or talk to your local case manager. They have a ton of resources, not just me, but a lot of social workers and case managers out there. They know their stuff. So definitely reach out to them as well.
That's a great recommendation. I have a segment where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest. And the question that I have for you, and we've kind of mentioned this a few times, but I'm going to ask it a little bit differently.
All right.
Is how do you find work-life balance and achieve success in both areas? So this is more specific to what you do to deal with your burnout, whether it's the gym, whether it's the friends. What are the specifics?
I'd say finding a community. So I found my communities in the salsa community. So I'm very involved with like salsa, Latin dance, bachata, that kind of area. I know all the local kind of places and I run into those people all the time. So I found a cool community there in Sacramento. My other community is the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of like at the Gender Health Center where Johnny also worked at for a bit. They have awesome like community groups, support groups. So again, building communities there. So I'd say that helps a lot is having those communities, you know, especially since my family's not in this area, it can get really lonely. So having that is essential, staying in touch with them, going to that, being consistent. Even if I'm feeling like low energy, I show up anyways, no matter how I am. So I think that one's huge. If I find that my mind's racing, there's too much going on in my mind, I slow things down. I cut things out. So music off. If I find that my thoughts are too loud or I feel like there's too much going on, I just take things out, right? Because the tendency can be distract, do nothing, you know, or immerse yourself into all these crazy things. But the important thing is to slow down, turn things off. Get your phone away, go outside, take a walk. It's in these boring things that we find that our thoughts need to talk. They need to have space to be able to relax and get back to an even keel. So I would say slowing things down, turning music off, turning distractions off for a little bit, not permanently, but just for a bit, just so your mind gets refocused and rehoned, right? Because people think, oh, well, meditation's the only way. Meditation's not the only way. People say mindfulness, and honestly, mindfulness is kind of it. You know, mindfulness, just, you could be doing the dishes mindfully, just like being like, wow, look at this plate. Wow, look at the suds. Oh, this is fascinating. It seems weird, right? But those tiny things, when we hone in and we're just so present, we're out of our thoughts, we're giving our brain a break, are game changers when it comes to taking care of yourself and your mental health. So that's big too. So community, having that downtime for your brain. And, oh gosh, what's the third thing? Ooh, drink water. Drink water. I know it seems silly. It seems simple. When in doubt, just drink water.
Stay hydrated.
Just stay hydrated. It is so essential. And I'm thinking about like mental, physical health. Like, it seems silly, but sometimes it's easier to go to get caffeine, get your Starbucks, get your Dutch Brothers, but the ultimate like best drink and best thing we could do is hydrate ourselves. That's huge. I would say that's part of self-care in a weird way, is making sure you're fueling your body with things that work well.
Yeah, those are great techniques.
I said this earlier, but I just kind of want to say it one more time.
Absolutely.
I think it's important. People want to think that therapy is the solution for healing. It's not, right? It's not just therapy. There are so many other ways to heal. A lot of people actually have a lot of ways that they heal themselves, you know, whether in a maybe skillful way or less skillful way, right? Alcohol you could use to cope, but it's not so skillful, right? You know? So I think everybody has, you know, those ways to deal with things. I think it's making sure that you find your healers in your community. This can be your local, right? If you're religious, your local shaman, your pastor, your whoever's at your temple or wherever. Good role models, people that, you know, you can connect with, trust, you know, best friend even, you know, people that you trust. Those are the healers in the community, is being able to look out, figure out who those people are, and stay connected to them. Because again, as much as I want to say like, yes, therapy is good, therapists are good, not all therapists are good. And there's so many ways to heal, right? There's so many things outside of what we consider in our very Western traditions, all these different things that these different countries and different people and groups of people do to heal on their own. Like, for example, my partner, he's Hmong. So we're in a very Hmong community. And the way they do their certain, like, they do frequent like rituals and ceremonies almost every weekend. And initially it seems really annoying. You're like, oh man, another weekend, gotta go to do this event, Jingle Bell or whatever. But these are great times where I see the community come over together over and over and over again, and ultimately build some really secure and solid communities to the point that some of these people don't even need therapy. They're so secure. They have the supports from all these uncles, all these aunts, people they talk to, they trust. Those are healing in its own. So as much as I want to say yes, therapy, I really want to encourage and hope that the world shifts to value those more. And also hope that maybe in the future, right, we have healers and we have an understanding of healers more than just the doctors, the social workers, more than people like me. Like people like you can be a healer in your own way, We all have this potential to be a healer and to be that person for somebody else that really helps them get through a tough time, And so don't discount your abilities, don't discount what you're able to do and how you're able to support people, because that's powerful. I think that's a game changer. Yeah, I just want to say that.
That's a great final thought. Geez, I just thought of a whole new topic. I don't want to go there, but I don't know if you guys, I remember way back I feel like this was in elementary school. We learned, maybe it was middle school, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and community was a deficiency need. I think it was the third pillar. And when you're suggesting that, don't let the therapist be the single point of failure. Have your community, have the shamans, your pastors, your friends, everybody could be part of that, because now you're building up that community. And it's easy to break one stick, but if you put 3 together, 4 together, it's really hard to break. So if you have those different pillars that are supporting you and you're building that community through your friends, and that goes for me too, right? People that are in my life, I could be one of those touch points that help them. So it's a good call to action for us and everybody who's watching that, hey, be mindful. Someone could be going through something. And you might be that person that kind of helps them.
You might be that person. In the smallest interaction, I like to encourage people from all fields, whether you're watching this, whether you're a cashier, whether you work with cars, whatever you do, you have a way to change somebody's day, even in a small way. And that's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing. We discount that. That is just as powerful. Seeing your regular automotive person and having a good relationship there, like unofficial therapist, not really a therapist, but can be as beneficial as having those other relationships. As you said, the more pillars you have, right? The more of those things, if you knock out one of those sticks, you're still there. You're not crumbling it,
Absolutely.
So I love that you brought that up.
For people that want to connect with you in the future, as you eventually open up your practice, how would they be able to search for you and get connected? Good
question. So I don't have an Instagram or social media or email yet at this time, but you can find me once I open up that private practice. I will do in person, ideally in person. So if you guys want to see me in person, that's awesome. I'm sorry, I won't be doing telehealth, but the way you can find me is just typing in Kimberly Schuster. So as it shows up on your screen, but for the podcast listeners, I'll spell it Kimberly. Schuster is spelled Schuster. Kimberly Schuster, and then LCSW, California. You'll find me there, and you'll find my practice, details about that, how to find me, what I'll be working on at that time. And I would love to connect with your listeners. So yeah.
That's awesome. We definitely got to bring you back for a follow-up episode whenever
I would love
their practice gets open. And we would love to figure out your journey on, hey, how'd you get into it? Right. What did you do to get your practice going? I mean, the marketing, the outreach, and all the stuff that goes into it. I'm sure it's going to be, even getting connected with all of the different providers, I'm sure it's going to be a work in progress.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yes. I'm looking forward to that. It'll be fun.
Well, Kim, thank you for walking us through the programs, the challenges, and the recovery journey, kind of how that all plays out. And, it's really clear that social work is not just about therapy. It's about navigating those complex systems, helping people access what they need, and providing hope where it's needed the most.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Key Gossips podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.